Let us begin in a small town in New Jersey in the years after the Second World War. The streets of Freehold were lined with modest wooden houses, their porches facing the sidewalk. In one of those houses on Randolph Street, a boy named Bruce Springsteen was born. Outside the front door, a single maple tree cast shifting shadows on the clapboard siding. Late in the afternoon, the light would turn a warm, dusty gold, filling the kitchen where his mother stood at the stove. The aroma of simmering tomato sauce hung in the air, mixing with the faint smell of floor wax. Everything was tidy and worn, held together by care and small repairs. From the window above the sink, you could see the neighbors sitting on their steps, talking softly as the day cooled down. This was a world of routine, of paychecks collected on Friday and lawns mowed on Saturday morning. The boy watched all of it with quiet, steady eyes, absorbing the rhythms of ordinary life. The house itself was small, 2 floors, a few rooms, and a basement that stayed cool even in summer. At night, you could hear the furnace kicking on and the muffled sound of the television drifting up the stairs. In the tiny bedroom, Bruce would lie awake, listening to the whistle from the rug mill across the river. That whistle marked the hours of work and rest for hundreds of men, including his own father, Douglas Springsteen. The sound traveled over the rooftops, solemn and comforting, a signal that the world outside was still turning. Through his window, the boy could see the glow of streetlights on Randolph Street, the yellow circles on the pavement, the outline of parked cars. There was no hurry in these hours, only the slow breathing of a town at rest. From this small room, full of shadow and faint radio static, a great journey would eventually begin. But for now, all was stillness. Douglas Springsteen worked at the factory and often came home with tired shoulders. He would sit in the living room in a worn armchair, the evening newspaper folded in his lap. The lamp next to him had a green glass shade that cast a pool of gentle light. He did not talk much, but his presence filled the room. Bruce sometimes sat on the floor nearby, building a model car or studying a baseball card, feeling the quiet weight of his father's silence. In that silence was a whole story of shifts, of wages, of things lost and never spoken. The clocks on the mantel ticked softly, marking the space between them. The boy did not fully understand it then, but he was absorbing the dignity and the ache of working-class life. This would later become the bedrock of everything he wrote. The house on Randolph Street held that story in its walls, in the creak of the floorboards, in the way the evening light fell across the worn carpet. The kitchen was the bright heart of the home. Adele Springsteen, Bruce's mother, moved through it with cheerful energy. She had the radio on, often tuned to a station that played big band melodies and early rock and roll. The white enamel table sat beneath a window, and morning light made the sugar bowl shine. When Bruce came home from school, he would sit there with a glass of milk, watching his mother's hands as they folded laundry or set out ingredients for dinner. She hummed along with the songs, and the sound of her voice was warm and easy. This kitchen was a place of safety and small joys, where the outside world could be kept at arm's length. The tile floor was polished, the curtains ruffled slightly in the breeze. Everything smelled of coffee and clean linen. It was here that music first entered his life, not as a lesson, but as a feeling, a backdrop to ordinary moments, something that made the sunlight on the tablecloth seem more vivid. A few blocks away stood St. Rose of Lima Catholic Church, a sturdy stone building with a tall steeple visible above the treetops. On Sunday mornings, the bells rang out over the neighborhood, calling families in their best clothes. Bruce and his parents would walk there, the morning sun casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of incense and polished wood. Stained glass windows glowed with deep blues and reds, telling stories in colored light. The boy sat in the wooden pew, his feet not yet touching the floor, and let the organ music wash over him. The ritual was slow and steady, like a lullaby for the soul. Those quiet hours in the church gave him a sense of something larger, a glimpse of beauty and mystery that would later find its way into his songs. The light through the windows softened the hard edges of the world, and the hush of the congregation was like an embrace. The streets of Freehold were his first stage. He would walk to school past the barber shop, the Five and Dime, the firehouse with its big red doors. The morning was crisp, and shopkeepers raised their awnings against the climbing sun. He noticed the way the light caught in the chrome of a delivery truck, how the tires of bicycles hummed on the asphalt. These details stayed with him, the texture of daily life that would later breathe through his lyrics. After school, he sometimes sat on the curb with friends, trading baseball cards and watching the sky turn pink behind the water tower. There was no rush, no frantic ambition, only the gentle unfolding of a boy's world. In the distance, the factory whistle blew again, a long, low note that seemed to hold the whole town together. Even then, Bruce carried a little notebook in his back pocket, sketching words that came to him like the sound of his own footsteps. At night, the house settled into a deep quiet. His parents turned off the lights one by one, and the only glow came from the street lamp outside. Bruce would pull the blanket up to his chin and listen to the distant rumble of a freight train passing on the edge of town. The sound was lonely and beautiful, a traveler's song in the dark. He thought about the people on that train, where they were going, what they were leaving behind. The ceiling of his room was crossed by a single crack in the plaster, a delicate line he traced with his eyes until sleep came. In that small house on Randolph Street, a boy was dreaming not of fame, but of motion, of stories yet untold. This was the quiet soil out of which every later anthem would grow. And when morning came, the light would return softly to the kitchen table, and another ordinary day would begin, full of hidden music. About 20 miles from the little house, the Atlantic Ocean met the shore at a place called Asbury Park. In the warm months, the boardwalk was a carnival of sound and color, children with cotton candy, the ringing of arcade bells, laughter spilling from the merry-go-round. But Bruce Springsteen learned to love it most in winter, when the crowds were gone and the air turned sharp with salt. He would come here as a teenager, standing at the railing and watching the gray waves roll in under an overcast sky. The wooden planks were bleached and quiet, the carousel horses hidden under heavy canvas, their brass poles catching the pale December light. There was a profound stillness in the off-season, a kind of beautiful loneliness that spoke directly to him. This empty boardwalk would become one of the central landscapes of his imagination, a place where dreams and memory mingled like sea mist. The boardwalk stretched along the beach for nearly a mile, with grand old structures facing the ocean. The casino building, with its domed roof and wide archways, stood like a gentle relic. Its painted wooden shutters had faded to a soft sea green. On a winter afternoon, the sun could break through the clouds for a moment and set the whole front glowing in pale gold. Bruce would walk slowly, hands in the pockets of his worn peacoat, his breath making small plumes in the cold air. The only sounds were the cry of a gull and the steady wash of the tide. He trained his eye on the textures, the peeling paint on a bench, the way frost clung to the iron railing, the reflection of the sky in a shallow pool of melted snow. Every detail was a note waiting to be turned into music. There was no drama here, only the patient patience of the sea and the weather, teaching him how to listen. Madame Marie's Temple of Knowledge sat near the boardwalk, a small booth where a fortune-teller had greeted visitors for decades. Even in the chill of January, a soft light burned inside, and the glass pane was fogged from the warmth within. Bruce would pause and look at the hand-painted sign, the faded curtains, and think about all the stories that had been told in that tiny room. He never went inside, but he carried the image with him, a quiet monument to faith and mystery. The boardwalk was filled with such small shrines, the silent arcade with its covered machines, the closed hot dog stand with its steel counters gleaming in the low light. All of it felt like a theater after the last act, when the actors have gone home and only the stagehands remain. For a young man searching for a voice, this emptiness was a gift. It allowed him to be alone with his thoughts, to imagine the lives that had passed through in summer and would return again. He would often arrive at dusk, when the street lamps along the boardwalk flickered on one by one. Their bulbs were wrapped in old-fashioned globes, and they cast a soft amber glow on the planks. The sea beyond became a deep indigo, merging with the sky at a horizon that was hard to find. Bruce would sit on a bench facing the water, listening to the rhythm of the waves. That rhythm was like a slow heartbeat, steady and reassuring. Sometimes he brought a notebook and scribbled lines while the light faded, his pen moving in time with the tide. The cold would eventually seep through his coat, but he stayed a little longer, watching the lights of a distant ship blink on the water's edge. This was a chapel of sorts, a place where he felt connected to something timeless. The boardwalk offered no applause, no spotlight, only the steady presence of the ocean, teaching him how to hold silence inside a song. The beach itself was a wide, empty stretch of sand in winter, marked only by the tracks of a solitary walker. The dunes were covered with brittle sea grass that rustled in the wind. Bruce would climb down the steps from the boardwalk and stand at the water's edge, where the wet sand reflected the gray sky like polished steel. He noticed how the foam line formed delicate patterns, then dissolved. These were the small, overlooked beauties that later found their way into his poetic images, the beach as a place of renewal, a borderland between hard reality and wide-open dreaming. On the coldest days, he could see chunks of ice washing gently against the shore, making a sound like wind chimes. The air was so clean it stung the lungs, but in a good way, a way that made him feel fully awake. Here, with his back to the empty amusement stalls, he could sense the raw, patient energy of the natural world, a force that demanded nothing but his attention. The circuit of the boardwalk became a ritual. He would start at Convention Hall, a massive Beaux-Arts building with arched windows and a scalloped roofline, its brick glowing in the late afternoon light. Then he would walk north past the empty rides, the silent bumper cars covered in plastic sheeting, the frozen Ferris wheel whose cars hung motionless under the clouds. By the time he reached the casino building, the light would be dying, and the windows would catch the last flush of sunset. He did not hurry. He wanted to feel every change in temperature, every shift in the color of the sky. This slow walking was its own form of meditation, a way of letting the mind travel without destination. The boardwalk told a story of waiting, waiting for summer, waiting for someone to care, waiting for a song to be born. And in that waiting, Bruce discovered the deep, resonant quiet that would anchor his loudest rock anthems, giving them a center as still and vast as the winter sea. The sky over Asbury Park in January could turn a soft lavender just after sunset, with streaks of orange lingering near the horizon. The amusement pier would be defined as a silhouette of dark towers and cables against that glowing backdrop. Bruce would pause at the railing and look back at the town, the streetlights of Ocean Avenue, the lit windows of the Berkeley Oceanfront Hotel, the gentle rise of steep-roofed houses beyond. It was a modest skyline, but full of tenderness. He felt a deep affection for this place, which asked nothing of him and gave him everything. This was the landscape that would forever shape his music, not the glittering city, but the quiet edge of America, where ordinary lives played out against the sound of the sea. The boardwalk in winter held the whole story: loss, hope, communion, and solitude, all wrapped in a cold, salt-scented breeze. And when he finally turned to go home, the boards creaked gently beneath his feet like a lullaby.